Good morning. Happy Sabbath, and welcome to each and every one of you that's with us today. If you're a visitor with us, I want to give you another welcome, a special welcome. And if we have a live stream going today? If we do, I welcome that audience as well. We are a family together. We come here for a common purpose, and that is to worship God. Worship God through our heart. But it's also important that we come together as a group, isn't it? We come with family, we come with friends. And I want to be talking about an important thing today. Some of you may have already seen my title of my sermon, Tesla. Some of you are familiar with that word, familiar with the company, manufacture cars, electric vehicles. And Elon Musk, a big name behind it, with many millions of followers. There's something that's important in the name, and I have an acronym here with this name. Tesla, the end of solo love affairs. The end of solo love affairs. Now, this acronym was created by engineers who worked at Tesla. These were creative engineers. These were people mostly that came out of college, young, beginning, ready to conquer the world. And many of them had just recently got married. And so when they look at this idea of a solo love affair, many of these engineers, they thought they had married their child sweetheart, and it would be love forever. But what they found did not come to fruition. It didn't happen. No, there was problems along the way. There was something that happened to these engineers that was very common among them. There was a brotherhood among these. They formed a team, and it was a creative team. There was strong interest. They built strong bonds with each other. But what happened here, it became the very focus, the very primary part, the work, crowded out the family time. And ultimately, many people who started their career among these engineers at Tesla also ended their first marriage at Tesla. Yes, it came and it went. That's not the way they envisioned the story. The idea of a solo love affair, that it was to be forever, did not happen. There was common ground among these engineers. They worked in cohesive teams. There was creative energies among them. And they committed to success. And they had much success. But not at home. Not at home. There was a common problem here. It's good. We're created to be creative and be challenged by that. But they had a common problem. The lack of accountability to their family relationship. So work came at the expense of their family. I want to say there's a primacy of relationships. Relationships are important, but there's a primacy of relationships. I'm going to touch on this, but we are created for relationship. And there was an important relationship that these engineers had among themselves. We're created to be in relationship with each other. That's a strong drive. But there's even a stronger drive, and that is to be faithful in a marriage relationship. And then an even stronger drive, and that is a desire to worship God. And so when I look at this idea of relationships, we want a relationship with God. We want a relationship in a marriage. And those are marriages God created. Again, a primacy of relationship, God at top. The marriage relationship, and then a relationship among ourselves. Well, that's more than a solo relationship. The way to make it work is accountability. These relationships have to have an accountability. Now, when we have a relationship with God, do we recognize that we have an accountability to that relationship? We do, don't we? And when we have a relationship with our spouse, our mate, we have an accountability to that relationship. And then we also have a relationship to one another, our friends, our coworkers, our associates that we build strong bonds with. But there's a primacy of those relationships. Sometimes we have to let certain relationships go, bring them to a conclusion, because they're destroying relationships of higher priority. Now, that's tough sometimes. That's challenging, and that's what these engineers were finding. It was a tough challenge, and it was hard for them to pull it off. And then, ultimately, the families collapsed. Now, while I was in college, I had the opportunity of working for a health food distributor company. And I was supposed to work while I was going to college from 2 o'clock in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night. But I also had another responsibility. I was supposed to stay until the work was completed. So I ended up staying every day till like 5 in the morning or later. And this was happening. And I had a 7 o'clock in the morning class. It was a math class. And I was top of the class in my math class. My uncle was the math professor. And here's the problem I had. I lived at his house. He was getting up to go to the class that I was supposed to be at the time I was coming home. That was a problem. I had a conflict. But I also had an accountability to that relationship that I felt was more important than my work relationship. After several months not being able to see anything but the same kind of thing, I had to terminate my work relationship for the sake of my family and school relationship. Sometimes we have to do that. It's not easy. But you do it because you maintain a primacy of accountability for your relationships. The desire to create was strong among those engineers. The desire to create is strong among each one of us. God created humanity, and He created desire in us to want to create. Yes, we have been made to create. The desire is great. Humans have this essence within them, this innovation, desire within them. Yes, it's interesting that the creative activities illuminate from the same cortex area as our emotions. A strong drive is there. And it produces the same hormone that makes us happy, dopamine. It's a real thing that's within us to want to create. But it's also interesting that this creativity is like a muscle. The more you use it, the better it gets. You can actually make it even better. It's creative, but it's one of the deepest yearnings of the human soul. I'd like to share with you one of the philosophies of Tesla and other companies as well. Increase the failure rate, increase the success rate. So increase the failure rate means you're accepting, you're embracing failure as part of the process. SpaceX, another company of Elon Musk, and they have a philosophy, and to me you can see it really well. If you've watched these rockets that are shot off by SpaceX, you watch at how fast they're innovating and improving compared to anything else before them. But they have this process is you create, then you experiment or test it, then you analyze it, and part of the analyzing, you take that and you make improvements, and then you iterate, which essentially means you do it again. So the first time you're counting on it being a failure, the next time you're usually counting on being a failure, the next time you're usually counting on being a failure, but not a failure because you've actually gained ground in what you know, what you've learned, that you put into the next iteration. And so you what? You recreate, you re-experiment, you reanalyze, and you reiterate, and you reiterate, and you reiterate until you come to success. Now, in the normal creating process, you feel a need in your mind, and you work backwards to accomplish its refinement. They are doing that in that process. And where the invention comes from, a lot of times it's filling the needs. So they start the process, and they accomplish until they get to what they want. Also, a lot of it comes from copying nature. So you say things in nature that maybe it looks like that could solve our problem. How do we adjust that? How do we create something? And then we experiment till we fine-tune that. But ultimately, it's this creation process. And the desire to create was what those Tesla workers were encountering. It was something they really enjoyed and experienced that they didn't want to stop. There's also another strong relationship. The desire to be in a relationship with co-workers, with each other, is another strong desire. There's much more accomplished. Research shows this by working together in teams than individually on projects. Some people have a job. They come into their office, they close their door, and they do whatever work they're supposed to do. Some people may even work from home and operate that way. But we need each other. That's where real creativity can happen. But not only real creativity, but what it does to you as an individual. There's something there. The desire to be in relationship. And then another strong desire is to worship. To worship. It's a strong desire that works from the inside out. We're created that way. Desire to worship something or someone. And if you don't worship God, you're going to find something to worship because you're created that way. Now, if you look at the primacy of relationships, if we've got the strong desire to worship, God is at the top. The primacy of the relationship, it has to be an accountability that will hold you check to that. Or it will be given up at the expense of maybe some of the other relationships. And then you have marriage created by God. There's an accountability in that relationship you have to maintain. And then you have this relationship with one another. But we are created more than just a solo love affair. We are created that way. We need to embrace it. That's who we are. It's part of who we are. What do we do with it? Relationships with accountability. If you don't have the accountability, your relationships will fall apart. Physically, mentally, spiritually, socially, we have been made to create. We have been made to be in relationship with. We have been made to worship. We are relational beings. But some of us get hung up on being doers. There's more to it than that. We're created for intimacy. Doing is not about intimacy. Intimacy is about being and relationships. The accountability. Do you think it's real? You find out if you do what some of these workers were doing at Tesla. They may have been meant well. They were trying to control it. But to make the decisions that they needed to make, they had to be maintaining a priority of relationships. If you start with God as first, that will help your next relationship, your marriage. And that marriage is good. It will help your next relationship to one another. But we don't change who we are created as. We embrace it. God created us for many relationships, but we have to have accountability, even down to having accountability with our friends. We have to have accountability, and they have to be held in check with accountability primacy. What's the top accountability you have? That what's hold is in check. We have been created for relationships. How do we worship God? How do we honor our marriage relationship? Says something about that. And how do we honor our friendships? If we respond in the point of view that I have accountability, it can be read by the other person. It can be read by God. Do you really have an accountability here? Relationships are to be created and enjoyed, but there has to be accountability. Creating relationships, how do we do that? By walking with, talking to. Yes, Genesis 5:24, Enoch walked with God, and then he disappeared because God took him away. Was there a relationship there? Yeah, a relationship that we'd love to have, right? Walk with God, and I'm so close in my relationship. Wow, it's going to continue forever. Genesis 6:9. This is the account of Noah. Noah was a godly man. He was blameless among his contemporaries. He walked with God. How did he create his relationship? Walking with God, in talking to God, having a relationship. You have to commit yourself to that relationship. 2 Kings 2:11, as they were walking along and talking, this is talking about Elijah and Elisha, so suddenly a fiery chariot pulled by fiery horses appeared. They went between Elisha and Elisha, and Elijah went up to heaven in a windstorm. What happened here? Elijah was having a relationship with God, right? Elisha too. But they were also having a relationship with each other. Walking and talking is part of relationship building. Exodus 33:11, the Lord would speak to Moses. This is Moses. This is God going to speak to Moses face to face, the way a person speaks to a friend. God is about relationships. God wants relationships. He wants relationship with you. Yes, the weak, wounded humanity that we are, God wants relationship with us. Genesis 17:1, when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am the sovereign God. Walk before me and be blameless. What God is saying to Abram, I want even a deeper relationship with you. God wants deep relationships with us. Do we want deep relationships with each other? With our mate? You have to invest in order to make it a deep relationship. It's not just going to happen. Same with God. You want a deep relationship with God? It takes time. It takes commitment. It's a purpose. We make the relationship through our walk and our talk. In the Jewish beginnings, it was all oral, the speaking. And in the Talmud, it came in writing, written form. And today, the Talmud is the most authoritative and important literary source of Jewish law. All right? There's a Jerusalem Talmud and there's a Babylonian Talmud. Two kinds. In this Talmud, there's two basic parts. Some of you may have heard of the Mishnah. And then another part, the Gemara. The Mishnah is a codification of the Jewish law, the laws, the regulations. And the Gemara, it's the commentary on it, the Mishnah. And so essentially what you have, the Mishnah is the halakha, the walk. And then the Gemara is the Haggadah, the talk. And so you have the walk and the talk. This relationship building is built into this Talmud. Is there a real good reason for that? I believe it's God ordained. Yes. If you look at the Gemara, it's principles. And if you look at the Mishnah, It's the laws, the statutes. Now, the principles are to stand the test of time. And the laws or the statutes, they're changed for the sake of times. But they're always going to be in agreement with the principles. If you take our country's constitution, that is equivalent to the Gemara, the principle base that stands the test of time. And then you have the Mishnah or the laws in a similar relationship, accountable to the principles. Now, if you start trying to undermine the principles by manipulating your laws to get what you want, you're tearing away the principle base. You're destroying the relationship base. And so when you look at other countries around the world, when we start tearing apart the principle base of our Constitution, we're destroying our relationships around the world that could have been built up over the history of this Constitution. And then you wonder why we may have problems with other nations. We bring it on ourselves by destroying what we stand for. There is an accountability here of the Mishnah to staying in alignment with the principles of the Gemara. We need it in our own lives. We need this accountability to make us worth something. Now, if you look at this, the Mishnah, to me, deals with what I do. What I do. And the Gemara is dealing with why I do. But then there's this important part of our identity. It's the merging of the what I do for why I do, which is our purpose for what we do. And that together gives an identity of who we are. I am who I am. Yes, relationship. But you know what's important about the relationship? It's not just doing or being part of the mission. Oh, these are all the rules and laws that I'm going to do. God doesn't want the doing. He wants the relationship. He wants the being. He wants you and me in relationship. Yes, this harmony of our identity is the being. Yes, the being. It's the what and why unite in the who. You as a person, an identity. It is our personhood. Are we one in Jesus? That's what God wants for each one of us. Be one in Him. It's the intimacy of relationship. He wants you in relationship with Him. The stages, the what stage? Learning to do and actually doing it. Okay, the why stage. This to me is the conversion stage. This is where you move from understanding what you're supposed to do to what? A purpose for what you're doing. And then the who stage. That's the harmony of the doing and being together in relationship. God wants relationship. But He not only wanted it, He created it for us so we could enjoy it. So we should have as many relationships as possible that we can handle. What one person may be able to handle in relationships, another may not be able to handle it. We have to balance it, and it has to stay in check with accountability. Accountability. We are made for relationships. Think through this just a moment here. Physically, we are made to reproduce. We are made with the ability to reproduce. Mentally, the ability to communicate. Spiritually, the ability to worship. Socially, the ability to learn from others. We are to be in relationship. If you look at 1 Kings with me, if you got your Bible, 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 1 to 3. We see here, verse 1, Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, including a detailed account of how he killed all the prophets with the sword. Now, Jezebel was not very happy about this. She sent a message to Elijah with this warning: "May the gods judge me severely if by this time tomorrow I do not take your life as you did theirs." Elijah was afraid. Can you relate to that? Yeah, maybe you have. If not, maybe committee calls you up for a job like what Elijah got to do. Would you like this job? No, I think I'll pass. You'll probably do the same thing as Elijah. It's not enough just to pass. You run. Elijah ran. He was afraid. He ran. It says Elijah was afraid, so he got up and fled for his life to Beersheba in Judah. He left his servant there. 1 Kings 19, verse 15 to 16. The Lord catches up with him. And he says to him, go back the way you came and then head for the desert of Damascus. But God didn't just stop there. He has 3 other things he wants him to do now. He's still one of his servants. He's still got jobs for him to do. He wanted him to anoint Hazael, king over Syria. He wanted him to anoint Jehu, king over Israel. And then lastly, he wanted him to choose Elisha to take his place as prophet. Well, verse 19 of 1 Kings 19 says Elijah went from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 pairs of oxen. He was near the 12th pair, and Elijah passed by him and threw his robe over him. So, all right, what's happening here? Here we see a farmer, right? Elisha's a farmer here, right? Plowing in the field. But Elijah throws his cloak over him or whatever. He's throwing his robe over him. What's that to mean? Somehow Elisha understands this. But Elisha has one thing he wants to do. And he runs after Elijah because he hasn't taken care of one thing. It says here in verse 20, he left the oxen, ran after Elijah and said, please let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, then I will follow you. He's concerned about his family relationship. He wants to take care of it and move on to what God is calling him to do. And he's prepared to do it there. And Elijah said to him, go back indeed, and what have I to do to you? And verse 21, Elisha becomes Elijah's assistant. And what we see here is the beginning of a mentor relationship. Have anyone ever heard of having a mentor and a mentee relationship? That's what was being created here between mentor Elijah and mentee Elisha, a relationship. And now, what's going to happen in this relationship? Elijah and Elisha, they're going to come alongside each other, and they're going to what? Walk and talk to each other, right? They're going to deepen the relationship. But that relationship also gives him a chance to learn and be able to be in a position to ultimately take Elijah's position. We can learn, we can grow and develop from what other people have gained that have come before us through this relationship. Now, we see the same kind of thing in Moses. He had an assistant. And what was his name? Moses' assistant was Joshua. Another mentor-mentee relationship God is using to continue his work. Now, your nominating committee has already been in process. Hopefully in some of that, there's been maybe assistants. They've made heads this time who have grown from learning from someone else that came before them, as equipped them and made them more capable of doing the job. Yes, we are created for relationships. And relationships can be beneficial in the church. They can prepare our future leaders for future roles and future jobs. But we need relationships. We need to be seeking relationships. And we're made for it. So what keeps us from doing it? Now, mentor's not in the Bible, but the word may be missing, but the principle is there. You see it with Elijah and Elisha. You see it with Moses and Joshua. And you'll also see it in the New Testament. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2. It says, and entrust what you heard me say. This is dealing with Paul, who mentors Timothy. It says, entrust what you heard me say in the presence of many others as witnesses to faithful people who will be competent to teach others as well. So Paul is mentoring Timothy, But ultimately, Timothy should mentor someone else. In 2 Timothy 3:10, it says, you, however, have followed my teaching. It's talking about Paul here. His teaching. It says, my way of life, my purpose, my faith, my patience, my love, my endurance. What was Paul teaching here? His character. Think about it. He's teaching his purpose, his faith, his patience, his love, his endurance. He's teaching them a lot, isn't he? If you see someone you identify and you say, I'd really like to be that way, somehow you gain a lot of respect. That may be someone you want to spend some time with, to learn from, develop from. We should be looking for positive mentors. If we don't, the negative ones may find you. Right? More importantly, we should be mentoring a servant heart. That's who we are. If you look at this primacy of relationship, this primacy of accountability, it starts with God at top, then our marriage relationship, then our friend relationships, and all that's going to improve all the way down the line. You keep it in harmony all the way down the line. And we become mentors of a servant heart. Mentors of a servant heart. Relationships are important, both in the world and in the church. Do we make time for it? Do we plan for it? There may be somebody in this body here that you respect something about them, that they're really good with this or that. Go and let them know. Find a way to maybe create a mentor-mentee relationship. There are lots of different mentor-mentee relationships. Create some. Be creative for our church body. I'll give you an example that I've used in several churches in my past. I call it the 4x4 groups. Remember, you may be familiar with this. I've done it in a few places. But it's creating relationships within your church body. 4 families is all it takes to form a group. You can form your own groups or whatever, but it can be an organized church program like I did many times. Each family was to form a monthly activity 3 times a year. So you have 4 families, you get together, and basically you just, at the beginning you may say, okay, you be responsible this month, you be responsible that month, and you cover all the months. And then all you have to do is plan 3 activities. But then what? This isn't going to work. There is not accountability, right? All relationships need accountability. And so to the group, each person was to plan something. Each person was to communicate when this activity would occur, and you communicate with everyone and let them know this is what we're going to do. And then you would execute the activity. What I found, the results were amazing. It created deep relationships. What we're finding many times is we don't have relationships anymore. And after we had the COVID scenario, now we're becoming very isolated. We need to be in relationship. And we need deep relationships. Not just, I know your name and that's it. We need to know about them. We need to be committed. That we can what? Help each other grow spiritually. Grow stronger. And the results I found was deep relationships. A deepening of the intimacy of the relationship. You know, Jesus had an idea for mentoring. I say idea, an acronym, IDEA. Who did Jesus spend time with? His disciples, right? And for instruction, he taught them with his words. D for demonstration, he taught them by his example. E for experience, he taught them with their own experience because they were to be doers who would ultimately be helping others. And then A for assessment. He taught them through evaluating their growth. IDEA. Jesus' idea for mentoring. Jesus' method for mentoring was he used positive reinforcement. We need to come alongside each other and build each other up and encourage each other. Some of us are dealing with all kinds of challenges in life. Jesus poured his life into 12 disciples. Disciples were the ones to make other disciples. Just like Timothy was not just to be learning himself when he learned from Paul, he was to carry it on to someone else. The people are the church, right? The church right here is called the Clovis Seventh-day Adventist Church. But what is the church if we don't have the people? It's nothing more than a building, right? So you are the church, the people. If you want your church to be a relational church, which is what draws people to the higher relational being of God, we have to be relational with each other. We need each other. We build each other up. Now, when Jesus was teaching his disciples, his method was what? Like children. Watch and do. That's what disciples were to do. Watch Jesus, then you know what to do. But it was more than just watching and doing, because ultimately Jesus wanted a relationship. And of those 12 disciples, he was dealing with flawed humanity. They weren't all perfect. And maybe they were all supposed to be watching and all supposed to be doing, but they weren't all successful. We're to watch and do as the disciples. The key is for us to move from the doing to the being, which is in relationship. Jesus wanted his disciples as well as us to be one. To be one. In other words, can we become one with Jesus? Can we become united in harmony? We can, can't we? Jesus wanted relationships. He wants you as beings of this church, not doers of this church. We could do all kinds of things in this church, but if we're not beings in this church, in relationship with one another and with God, what have we accomplished? Lots of doings that will come and go. But if we were beings, we're going to be driven to accomplish great things for God. Relationships. We have to be beings. But there has to be room for mistakes because we are what? Human. So if you build relationships, you can't expect it's going to be perfect. We're fallible humanity. Expect that we are still going to be human. I'll give you an example in dealing with mistakes and allowing for it. In teaching my children, I would say, what is the worst thing that can happen whenever they're fearful of trying something? Because my concern is if they're going to fail, I want them to fail on whatever they're trying, not fail from lack of trying. Many of us fail because we don't ever try anything. Yes, I wanted their failures come not from trying, but from actually iterating, learning from their experience, and growing deeper. So here's what I did with my children. Give them an example. So we're making a cake, and we needed eggs. My children were afraid to crack the eggs. You know, they never made a cake before. They were learning how to make a cake, and right off the bat, they're afraid of cracking the eggs. Well, how am I going to teach them the principles that I want them to learn here? So what I did, well, I'm explaining this, what's the worst thing that can happen? I drop an egg deliberately on the floor. They were in shock. Now, we still had a mess to clean up, but it wasn't the end of the world. We still went on with making the cake. And they sure had a story to tell their mother, too. More importantly, they were learning to be risk takers. They were willing to try something. I say we should be experimenters with lots of creative ideas within our church of how we can together make things happen as a true body of the church. There are many different types of mentors. The traditional mentor, which we saw with Elijah and Moses, was one-on-one, right? But there's also one that deals with distance. It's kind of like a virtual mentoring. And with technology today, we can have lots of different relationships because we're in that technology era where we can do this now. You got internet. You got ways to communicate, even if you're not right there within the same spot with the person. You go back to the Jews, they had the oral, they had to be right there with each other, right? But now we have other ways. We can be creative. Things change. We can improve and take advantage of those things. The key is to be in relationship. And then there's the group type relationship. You can have a single mentor who has a group of mentees that he's teaching at the same time. Maybe he has a specific skill that he can share with many. And then there's the spiritual mentor. This is based on an interest that they have. Here's what you might see. A spiritual mentor is anyone who mentors you from a place of faith. Yeah, well, there's something right there, a place of faith. And this kind of mentoring relationship, you'll probably talk a lot about your walk with the Lord, how to grow in your faith, things you're struggling with, and where you see God in your life. Does that sound like something realistic and a spiritual mentor? Then there's a professional mentor. You're going to pull from those skills that maybe you want to learn from each other. And then there's the peer mentor. A peer mentor is someone that's about your age or a little older, but in whom you've seen something you really respect. Most of the time, this mentoring relationship will be more loose and casual compared to the others, but can be a really valuable way to learn from someone who is similar to you. The kind of mentoring relationship should go beyond just friendship. We want relationships. There's other relationships. You can create relationships, but you want to make friends. You want to grow together, develop together. There's the older and wiser mentor. You find the older one with wisdom. You want to learn from them. You gather around and learn what you can. I had an opportunity myself as a child to choose a spiritual mentor. He was important to me when I was a child. Perry and Wanda James would come to my house every year for many weeks, and for many years this continued. Perry James had been my dad's head elder when he was growing up in Ohio, and he would come down to Florida and spend time. Now this guy, I didn't find out till later on, he worked at International Harvester, and I met the guy that he actually had mentored in his job. He had the opportunity to be the senior vice president for the company. He declined because he was fearful of Sabbath conflicts. But he took the opportunity to train a person within the workplace to do that job. And that person told me how he became the senior vice president of this company and how he achieved all these things because International Harvester was a company and it had been successful as a company. He had all these things because he gave it to him. He developed him, but he developed a lifelong friend as a result. Yes. And Perry, he would spend time with me. He taught me how to play horseshoes, how you do it just right, and and how you make it so the shoes open and it lands flat open, and get it up so it turns over. All these things taught me how you even keep score and how it works. You see, that's minor. But he was building something even deeper with me. Yes. And then I even had an opportunity to go visit him in Ohio. And in Florida, I grew up. I did a lot of fishing. He advanced my fishing knowledge in Ohio on the Lake Erie. He had done a lot about fishing as well. We built common ground. We spent time and built lifelong relationships. He was my spiritual mentor. But what is most important about a spiritual mentor? A person coming alongside another as a companion on the journey of faith to help them answer the questions of life. Who is God? Who am I in Christ? The identity issues, right? To what has God called me as I live out my life? Why am I here? What's the purpose in life? Some of us need that spiritual mentor. Seek them out. Become a better person. You can do it. I had another case, a traditional mentor, one-on-one relationship. An older, more senior person coming alongside a younger, inexperienced person of me. I started this relationship myself. I went to his office. I didn't know him, at all. In fact, he was an executive of the one major corporations in Fort Worth, Texas. I had no way to get. He was on a locked floor. The executive suite was locked. You couldn't get to it. But I got access to it by going up the fire escape. I made it onto the floor. Then I had to try to keep from getting caught. Found out where the office was. Then I had to get past the secretary in the office to get to this guy. And I made it to this guy. And I started this relationship. He was impressed by my investment knowledge, and he agreed to meet with me again. I asked him for a job at the very beginning, and all I could get was another meeting with him. And I had to meet with him 3 more times before I convinced him to make a job for me. So ultimately, he made a job for me. I had to get it approved by his board, but he made a job for me. And interesting, out of this job, I made more money in a very short time than they made in the history of the company. And I was only working part-time because I was still going to school. So they didn't care about my school. They wanted me full-time. They were just looking at making more money. And so I accelerated my education so that I could get out quicker so I could work full-time. And so at age 20, I became the equities portfolio manager for 13 insurance companies. Managed all the stock investments for these. But see, that was an opportunity for me to what? Learn from someone else. He was a senior person. In fact, when I used to go to meetings where all the money managers from the country would come together, I stood out. Most of these people were up in their 60s because they spent their whole life getting there. And I started out at 20 years of age. But I had the opportunity of learning from Bill Knight, my mentor. And I learned important things. The planning, the goal setting, the connections with the best in the industry, where I learned even more from the other great people. And hearing Bill Knight's daily stories from the Petroleum Club, which was the very top of our building was a Petroleum Club. He would go back and forth, and here's where all the corporate titans were meeting. Charles Tandy and other big executives were there. And he would come back and he would share stories with me. And I was learning from their experiences. And so it is. We have people here in our midst. We can learn from them. We can learn from their friends. But also by learning and knowledgeable about who their friends are, you can also be a witness. Maybe the person you're coming alongside, maybe not even a Christian. But you can have something you're in common with that person, and then you're making contact with him and with their friends. You can also be in a position to witness. And we talk about evangelism. To me, the key is being an effective relationship builder. An effective relationship builder. And to me, this is what I found in my experience, having worked and doing a lot of door-to-door work from an early age. Be vulnerable. You don't know something? Say you don't know something. Say, you could help me learn this. You go to them, and you let those people share with you. That's one of the best ways to witness to people, is being open to learn from them. Not that we have all the answers. Great opportunities while removing barriers is what we should be doing. People with knowledge and skills like to share their strengths. It's a way of flattery. You recognize there's an expertise in them. We can be needs-driven. We can offer them as a need. We need help. Help me. Or we can be target-driven. You recognize the expertise and you seek them out. Effective relationship builder. Another good friend of mine was Carl Tanksley. I consider him one of the best relationship builders, and I got to learn from him because we were close friends. I first became acquainted with him when he was a publishing director of the Southwestern Union Conference while in college at Southwestern Adventist College in King, Texas. He trained people in door-to-door sales. Door-to-door. He was the union leader for this and went all over it, developing the colporteur work. He was a gifted person, and I learned at his feet a lot. I later met him in Virginia, where my wife and I house sat for his wife and him, and they were out of the country on a mission project. We became very close and spent a lot of time together. I used to help him in cutting wood and all kinds of other things around the house, helping him. But as I'm doing all that, I'm learning from him as well. And one of the things he would do, he would take me around his neighborhood. He had created these relationships in his neighborhood all over, and they were deep relationships. And before I went away to seminary, he wanted me to take this ministry over for him because he was getting up in age. And unbeknownst to me, he actually had cancer. And so when I was gone to seminary, my wife hadn't actually gotten there yet. He actually died. I wasn't able to attend the funeral, but my wife was. But I learned from him because he knew how to build relationships. It would be amazing. These people come together. I mean, he would even have some times where he'd get all the people he could together, if he could, and get other groups, you know. He broadened that group. But he knew how to work with these people. There's actually a book written about his life. But he was special to me. And I got to see he had skills that came from a lifetime of gifts from God that I could learn from. There could be people in this church body here today that have skills been developed over a lifetime that you could learn from. Yes, that you can learn from. God has created us to be in relationship. He has given us gifts that we can share and help each other, including our church. Are you willing to be part of that? I challenge you as a church body, look for creative opportunities of how you can establish relationship. Maybe it's only you creating a mentor-mentee relationship, with you either being the mentee or the mentor. But create relationships. We want a relational body. You know, when you become relational, it becomes catchy. You can't be a visitor that would come in this church without being swarmed with all kinds of people because they can't control themselves. They're already used to being in relationship. They see someone else they don't know. They won't establish relationships. Relationships. They start at home. They start right here. The question for you and me, are we willing to be in relationship? Are we willing to commit to relationship? Relationship to Jesus or to one another? I challenge you. Take the opportunity to create a relationship. Thank you.